For those of you listening, we are not done yet. In episode 2, David and I are actually going to be diving deeper into how we bridge the gap between Eastern and Western medicine by developing a common language in pediatric care. So make sure you subscribe or follow I Heal Kids wherever you're listening to the podcast. And again, I am Dr. Ellie, and this is I Heal Kids. I mean, this is so fascinating because actually in the conversations that I've had with chiropractors who are like, hey, we've been talking about the nervous system forever. And then my kind of experience in functional medicine. So if I put on my little functional medicine integrative pediatrician hat versus, my Western training, I've been thinking a lot about the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And so this is kind of our stress hormone if we're thinking about it in that kind of with those optics, with that lens on. And a lot of times parents will come to me for digestive issues. That's, of course, like huge in pediatrics, as you know, or ADHD or other things. And I'm starting in on, okay, what are our relaxation techniques? And they're like, wait, he's not pooping.
Right.
Like, did you catch that part? And so it's sort of, I've just noticed lately there seems to be like this convergence around regulation, nervous system, the adrenal hormones, like the catecholamines, like, epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol, and how that's affecting our immune. So like the Western, and then for lack of a better term, like kind of this more Eastern vantage point, and then the chiropractors, it's like, I don't know, it just seems to be kind of gelling and everyone's sort of converging in this like collective consciousness that we have completely missed that children are human beings with that
Yeah.
need to develop resilience, among other things. And also, in my experience, it seems like sometimes we as adults think that children don't have internal or external stress. Like, why would it be stressful to go to kindergarten? And it's like,
Right.
that's huge for a kid. It's huge. It doesn't have to be a big T trauma, that we might think about that, where we're like, oh my gosh, my kid's not stressed. Like they don't have, anything like that going on in their life. And thank heavens, but there's all these kind of little cumulative things. And then to your point, when you overlay that personality structure, which I have to definitely confess that I'm part of that CEO driven, fiery personality structure. So I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm like, I'm going to go through this roadblock and you just what? But it can get really out of hand. It reminds me of like my Ayurvedic friends who are like, your fire dosha is like steaming. Like we need to help
Balance,
you
find a
with that.
balance somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just interesting how it like kind of all is overlaying and coalescing. I don't know if you've noticed that in the children's hospital as much from the more conventional pediatricians, but I certainly have noticed it in the holistic world.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's amazing because we're starting to develop a common language around these
Mhm.
things. And, it's the beauty of living in a highly literate culture with, the beauty of with despite its downfalls, the beauty of the exposure to media, like the hyper exposure to media that we have, is that parents are so educated in a certain way. Especially a lot of the time, the parents that tend to find me, at least. I do live in my bubble. But, yeah, it's been great because then I can start to have conversations with them about, like, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, and I'm typically not having to necessarily always explain sort of the nitty-gritty about it, which I like explaining the nitty-gritty of it, it
Me
really
too.
yeah, it really has informed a lot of the way that I think nowadays, because like, a lot of it, like, going back to these, say, stressed out kids, it's like a lot of what I'm thinking about now is, in terms of like sort of the sympathetic nervous system is like, again, there's kind of this threshold system where it's like you have a certain amount of times that your partner can text you something annoying before you're going to get mad about it. Right. And that the way the sympathetic nervous system ends up working is that every time you do end up getting really mad about it, it like lowers your threshold a little bit so that it gets
Mhm.
easier and easier and easier and easier to get stressed out. And this threshold or limit is sort of in a lot of ways informed by how your limits were set in childhood. So if everyone around you was constantly flipping out about every small thing rather than employing a problem-solving mindset, your threshold for stress is going to be pretty low. And so
Mhm.
then the way that I'm thinking about it is I'm saying, look, like, when your brain, when a kid's brain or an adult's brain, when you perceive something to be stressful, like somebody cuts you off on the road, or you go to kindergarten or something like that, your brain registers that as a stress, because one of the things that's really interesting about kids is that, as you said, we don't necessarily always see what the stressors are from an adult perspective, but from a kid perspective, change is a stress. Just
Yes.
anything that's out of the ordinary for them, anything that represents any kind of change can be a stress. Like I'll get little brothers who get diarrhea when the older brother or older sister go off to kindergarten.
That is fascinating. Yes, the family system dynamic. Yes.
Yeah. So that's
I've
just a
yeah.
change for the kid. And then
Mhm.
suddenly they have some physical response. It may be an emotional response, it could be a physical response, but something changes there. Right.
Do you notice like an exaggerated response? Like I'm thinking of some of these conditions that are just really, really can be heavy for parents, like children with autism spectrum, with like global developmental delay, severe speech delay, maybe they're nonverbal. Like, do you find that in children who are experiencing things like that, that their response can almost be what some might consider exaggerated, but for them is how they're sort of wired? And like, how do you work with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that ends up being that it ends up being exactly how this personality structure tends to react around everything, which is big reactions, right? And then
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's like actually this it goes back to what I was saying. It's like your brain perceives something stressful, and then that causes the release of certain hormones, certain neurotransmitters, and then your body physically ramps up.
Hmm.
So your
Hmm.
heart rate goes up, the blood pressure goes up, all those things.
Immune system goes down.
Yeah, immune system, digestion, all the non-essential functions start to disappear on you, which is why it's no good to live in a chronically stressed state because you need those things. But when the body then reacts to those things, it seems to me that your brain reacts to a stress, which causes your body to respond to that stress to get ready for fight or flight, essentially. Then when your body responds, it's almost like your brain then looks down at your body and is like, "Well, what are you responding to?" And then kind of ramps up itself in a way. So you end up in this kind of funny thing where it's like the faster your heart beats, the more your brain starts to get anxious, which then makes your heart beat faster. So you're kind of stuck in this bit of a cycle there.
Yeah.
So then when the parents come in, so whether it's an autistic child, whether it's ADHD, it could even be like things like Down syndrome. You get some of the Down syndrome kids who are quite feisty. Down
Mhm.
syndrome kids are typically so sweet and
Friendly,
just
sweet, yeah.
yeah, just a joy to be around. If any being was ever put in this world to show us how to love, it's a Down syndrome kid, but every once in a while you'll get one that is just so feisty. And so all of these kids, then the way that I talk to the parents is I'm saying like, look, like there are these external stressors that we need to address. So I'm having a conversation with the parents about parenting styles, about how to work with these kids such that we're problem solving, we're redirecting without confrontation, because the confrontation
Mhm.
is going to increase that brain response and it's going to increase that physical response. So I'm
Yes.
teaching them sort of like effective problem solving, non confrontational parenting styles.
Uh-huh.
And what I'm saying is like for them, I'm educating them on how I view these things and how to work with their own child in order to reduce that stress response. And I sort of pin that on them. I'm saying like, look, this is your responsibility in this situation.
Yeah.
And then my responsibility in that situation is to, in a sense, reduce that physical response. So as that
Okay.
physical response begins to reduce, so they may perceive something stressful, but then the body doesn't dump as much stress hormones, cortisol, norepinephrine, and these stress hormones don't dump as heavily into the system. They recover from that faster. Then it doesn't; those chemicals don't then turn around and drive the brain to stay on that track for a really long time. So there's sort of this dual responsibility situation that we sort of do in the
Yeah.
clinic.
Yeah, because you really cannot take a child out of in my experience anyway, you just can't treat a child outside of the family system. I mean, it just doesn't work because that child is usually in some kind of system where they have a parent, two parents, some people are polyamorous. There's some kind of structure, grandparent, whatever, foster, which is a whole different story. And it's really, really difficult to treat a child when we have unresolved issues as adults working with those children. I notice, like, even I don't have children, but when I work with children in the clinic, if I'm unregulated, if I'm dysregulated that day, I haven't slept well, or something in my personal life is going on, I notice that the appointments are not flowing as well. And I really do have to do some grounding exercises in between patients, like deep breaths or like even a 5-minute meditation, just to kind of bring it back. And then from there, I notice, like, the flow with the children is easier. They're, letting me listen to their heart without, they pick up on that energy and they sort of are like, no, something's not right with you. Like, I'm not coming near you today. But as soon as you can ease into it. And I think that's difficult sometimes when you're in a situation where there are children that are highly charged or, like you said, very feisty, and you're noticing your adrenaline's going through your roof, especially when it's like a chronic kind of condition, to sort of step back and be like, what do I need to do to regulate? Because oftentimes I notice with parents, they almost feel like it's selfish to take time for themselves or to take time to do those care activities, so that they can kind of bring themselves back. Or even they may not have been raised in a situation that was healthy and maybe miss the skill set. And so sometimes
Well,
we almost have
this
to go back and learn, like, the nurtured heart
yeah.
approach or another kind of parenting approach that's more in line.
I would say that's a big one is just that skill set like, as I was saying before, this sort of non-confrontational parenting style, as
Yeah.
much as is possible. I feel like a lot of the times, especially with kind of stressed out kids, is we sort of these parents tend to get stuck in what I sort of call the discipline spiral, right? Where,
Mm-hmm.
the kids sort of quote unquote getting worse, and then the parents are ramping up the discipline to get on top of it. And it's just
Yeah.
not, right? So
Yeah.
these kids they live to interact. They just live to be part of the family and to just be an equal member of the family. They want to be as adult as possible, in the sense that these kids like to be respected, in a sense. And what I mean by that is, like, to the degree that it's possible when talking to these kids, is to give them some space. And like, a good example of that, like, instead of constantly confronting every little problem with my 5-year-old, she can be a little feisty at times. Instead of confronting every little thing as like a learning lesson or something like that, it becomes more about just redirecting
Yeah.
her, just moving her off in a different direction, and just like helping her to understand that when she's feeling feisty, when she's feeling like she wants to obstruct the process. No, I don't want to go to dance class. Like, oh, well, okay. Then, rather than ramping up the discipline in that situation, that the real thing is to talk to her to the degree that it's possible, like she's an adult. And just be like, I see what and then, rather than just yelling at her, like, hey,
Yeah.
get it together, let's go. I pick her up. I hold her. We just talk about something else. We just hang out for a minute, and, she's in a position where she then self-regulates. She
Hmm.
kinda snaps out of it, and then suddenly
Yeah.
she's like, "Yeah, let's go to a dance." Like, "Alright, cool." And
Yeah.
it's for me, it's like, I think a lot of the times in this culture, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like in this culture, we worry that that kind of parenting style is spoiling them or something. That if we don't confront the bad behavior and use it as a learning time for the child, that somehow we're inculcating that behavior into them. That by redirecting that energy, by just giving them some time to interact, and just to sit with them for a moment and relax, create
Hmm.
some connection time, that maybe some parents feel like I'm somehow spoiling my kid. I'm not confronting this bad behavior or something. But I would
Hmm.
always argue that redirecting, connecting and stuff, that's a wonderful skill to have as an adult.
Yeah, I think this speaks to maybe as a hustle culture where it's like, we've got to go. We got to get to school. We got to get to class. I got to get to work. We got to do the thing. We got to get the grocery. We got to go to the dance class. We got to. And by the end of the day, like, I'm stressed out. And I'm an adult listening to what this child has to do in a day. And I think sometimes we think, like, oh my goodness, if we're 15 minutes late to ballet or something really awful is happening, or, who knows? We're just feel some kind of sense of responsibility to get there on time or whatever. But oftentimes just taking that moment to slow down and co-regulate
Yeah, right.
will speed
This is
up the process, as
yeah.
opposed to, I think what you're talking about is like, oftentimes because it triggers our emotion, right? And our cortisol, we're like, okay, now I'm getting
Co-regulating is a
higher and
good
higher
word.
and higher and higher. Yeah. So I actually just need to step back. Yeah. I'm hoping you can tell us a story though, because I think that, I can talk about theory all day long, but I think maybe it could be a challenge for some parents to kind of wrap their head around how this works in practice. So I'm wondering if you can tell us. I noticed, I think it was it may have been your Facebook. I don't know if it's your Instagram, but you were talking about a child that you were working with global developmental delay. Do you want to say more about that child, obviously leaving out names and identifiers, and how you approach treatment? Like if someone comes to you with like something like that, where do you start? What steps do you go through? How long do you expect treatment to be? What kind of outcomes can parents sort of expect to occur? Just kind of walk us through like a scenario, because I know you've had a lot of success with this, and I just want to
Sure,
make
sure,
sure
sure,
all
sure.
the parents understand and hear about it.
Yeah, so we're talking about in this situation, the global developmental delay, and that was
Yeah.
especially a speech delay. But what they were
Okay.
noticing, so parents emailed me initially and were like, "Hey, they gave me kind of a general rundown on what was going on. Our child is delayed in speech quite a bit. Kid was, 4 or 5 and had, speech patterns, maybe a year delayed or so. So nothing, nothing too bad, but still there. But then the problem was that there was other developmental factors around that the doctors were noticing. Height and weight were a little behind. I think the child had gotten pretty close to falling off the growth chart there. And things like teething was late, walking had
Mm,
been late, crawling had been late, motor coordination was not where it should be for a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old. So gross motor, fine motor skills. So there was just this in the doctor's conception of it, there was just this perception of it. There was just this notion that there were a lot of things that weren't sort of catching up. The thought process was there. Cognitively, the kid was fine, sort of could operate academically, should be able to operate academically fine, but was just, emotionally seemed good. But just all of these other developmental things were kind of lagging.
okay.
So then the mom sends me an email and just kind of gave me a brief rundown on it. Like, hey, we got these delay issues, speech being the main one. Is this something that you've worked with before, something that you're willing to work with? And yes, of course, worked with speech delays many, many times.
Yeah.
And so then they come in. So mom came in with the child, and then basically they just come into the clinic, and the clinic has toys in it. So the kid's just kind of messing around and playing. And what I always do is if the kid is a little shy with me at all, like this kid was a little shy with me, I just ignore them. I just like they don't exist to me. Like I don't engage them. I just, because then they feel kind of safe in that circumstance.
Yeah.
I'm not putting a lot of pressure on them, eye contact and all this stuff. And
Yeah.
so then I've got toys
It's
in
like
my.
those grandmas that are, like, in the baby's face and the baby's, like, crying.
Yeah,
And, like, if
I was
you
like,
think
I
about
don't.
it, like, if someone was, like, that close to my face, I would be completely freaking out.
Yeah,
I'd be like,
and
"Who are you, and why
I
are you
lose them.
here?"
I lose them once, I lose them forever, so I'm very careful with that one, like, so I just ignore them like they don't exist for a while. This kid was shy, so if they're not
Yeah.
shy, then whatever, we're just hanging out. But what that does then is the kid is just playing with toys. So they're in
Yes.
here checking out my toys and they can kind of hide out. And I kind of pull myself in a little bit. I make myself smaller. I'm quite tall. So I just kind of make myself a little small. I kind of crouch in my chair. But then I'm just talking, in this case, to the mom, and I'm just getting the full rundown.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
she's
yeah.
telling me the stuff I was telling you before about what's going on. And the speech in particular, just the breadth of vocabulary, the breadth of sentence structures weren't quite there, comprehension, and then being able to sort of turn around and almost like memory kind of stuff, like short-term memory stuff was kind of not there. So in talking to the mom, we sort of suss out everything that's going on around this global delay thing, with the central focus being on the speech. So then what we do is, once we've unpacked all of that, then I talked to the mom and I said, look, from our perspective, here's what we think is going on. And here's essentially what we think we can do. So in this case, with that speech thing, what I was arguing was that this child basically had what we would consider like an underfunctioning frontal lobe. Like the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain was probably just underfunctioning, among other things that may be going on. In this case,
Okay.
there wasn't like anxiety and stuff. So I wasn't worried like that the amygdala was involved. There
Amygdala,
wasn't,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
there was some coordination issues, but I didn't think it wasn't like gait issues where it's like brainstem stuff is going on. Not that deep.
Yeah.
And it was all just kind of coordination stuff, coordinating speech, coordinating movement and stuff. So all that stuff starts to sound like prefrontal cortex stuff to me, which is that part of the brain, for everybody who's listening, is that part of the brain that is really for higher rational thinking. Like that's being able to listen to somebody talk, follow along, have your own ideas about it, and then being able to take that information in and think about it. Then that's also the part of the brain that sort of organizes everything else. So it organizes the
Yeah.
ability to think of something and then produce speech.
Yeah.
It's the ability to take in all of your environment and to be able to move through your environment physically with good coordination. So it's kind of this
Yeah. To
organizational,
execute.
yeah,
Yeah.
execution function of the brain.
Yeah.
So it sort of organizes everything in the brain and then executes that, right? This kind of managerial function, so to speak. So speech, the function of speech comes from a couple of different parts of the brain and then is ultimately organized and executed by the prefrontal cortex. So because speech was the main issue, that was what I was talking to the mom about. I was saying, like, look, this is the area that we want to focus on. Now, what's interesting about that is that in Chinese medicine, that part of from a functional perspective, looking at organizational function, looking at motor coordination, looking at speech, all of those things. And I don't know how to explain why this is going on, but though that particular situation was all related to digestion.
Wow, that's amazing.
There
That's
is
like
this
functional medicine.
I do not
Yeah.
understand exactly how this works, but that particular set of circumstances, for some reason, that prefrontal cortex function, when you strengthen the digestion, that part of the brain gets stronger. There's a good example of this, which is what we call inattentive type ADHD,
Uh,
right? Which is
yes.
kids not who are hyperactive, but kids who are spaced out.
Spaced
Yeah,
out.
so they're
Yes.
distracted, but they're spaced out, and they get that phenomenon where when they look at a math problem, they get that phenomenon called frontal lobe turnoff. Dr.
Yes.
Amen up in Orange County, California, he coined that term, which is that part of the brain that they need in order to digest what's going on, look at the math problem, understand what's going on, digest all that information, and then come up with a plan to the order of operations to figure out that math problem. The prefrontal cortex should light up. Instead, it literally shuts off.
Yeah.
So
This
when
is like me when my husband wants me to do something.
yeah, this exactly.
Prefrontal shut off.
Yeah, the more complex the problem gets, the more I'm just like, and my wife is like, "Do you get it?" And I was like, I'm sorry, I actually didn't catch any of that. My frontal lobe had shut off because I just was like, I'm out. I don't understand anything." So, I mean, that'll be those kids where it's like you're trying to help them with their math homework, and it's like geometry, and then you finally get to the point with them where you're like, "Honey, what is 1 plus 1?" I don't know. I just don't know. So that frontal lobe is just off, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't know how to explain why this works, but when you start to strengthen digestion,
Mhm.
that function comes online. So you stimulate the digestive function, you strengthen the digestive function, that part of the brain comes online. It's like, because that's kind of how Ritalin works. It's a stimulant, it works on that part of the brain and stimulates that part of the brain, but it doesn't ultimately fix the underlying problem. So
Yeah, it helps kind of boost the dopamine, which is like our focus neurotransmitter. This is so fascinating though, because really, David, like in functional medicine, we talk a lot about the gut brain axis. So when there's inflammation in the gut from whether it's hidden infection or sometimes we call it leaky gut. So, things are not working as they should. Bad things are getting into the gut and good things are getting out where they shouldn't. And that causes inflammation in the body. Inflammation is another word for immune response or immune activation. And that actually causes inflammation in the brain because as we know, the brain is connected to the body by this like complicated section known as the neck
it's
that we
complicated.
often like to forget about in Western medicine that we are connected, in fact. And so I think, when you talk about that, it makes perfect sense to me from, my functional medicine lens that strengthening the digestive system would, in fact, help the prefrontal cortex because that's a lot of the work that I do with kids with ADHD. And I love that they're synergistic
Mhm.
and that parents have the option now to layer on. It doesn't have to be we just see the pediatrician or the integrative pediatrician. It's like we can see the integrative pediatrician, we can see you for acupuncture and Chinese medicine. We can see the chiropractor. We can layer on all these holistic pieces. We can talk to the nutritionist if we need extra support. And we can have this like holistic caretaking of a child who's experiencing these symptoms, which is, I mean, that's amazing. I
We
love
live in
that
a
so
beautiful
much.
time. I'm just amazed at all of the things that parents have access to nowadays, which is why it's like functional medicine has been great. You guys are on the cutting edge of Western medicine, and then Chinese medicine coming up behind, and all of these things supporting each other. It's great. I just yeah.
Yeah, and I love that you're integrated. It's well, at least it sounds to me like, I mean, you're working in a hospital system. So the fact that it's, that's where I live, right? Because middle path, right? I live in the middle path. So it's like the integration of these modalities. It's not like to the exclusion of. It's like how can we blend the best parts of everything to create the optimal health for children?
Yeah, it's
Yeah. Well, listen, I could talk to you all day. We are starting to run out of time, but I want to just make sure that people know a couple things about you. One, you have amazing herbal formulas, which I think is super important to know because there aren't that many for kids on the market. Free Spirit, Golden Lungs, and Facts Protect. So if you have less than like 1 minute to talk about that, and then maybe a couple minutes just to tell us how people can work with you. I know you do telehealth. So all of those people who live in Asheville, y'all can work with Mr. David Allen. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so you guys can find me at my website, David Allen LAC, and you can schedule there. You can see what I got going on. I do have a small herbal line that's slowly expanding, and each of the formulas addresses, like Golden Lung addresses chronic lung inflammation leading to breathing distress problems, things that inhalers would normally be useful for, these kinds of things. The Vax Protect, protecting brain inflammatory issues, trying to resolve brain inflammatory issues as much as possible. And then the other one, which is more of a behavioral thing, kind of what we were talking about a lot today. So I do have my things, but I have a full range for the telehealth. I'm mostly doing herbs. The herbs are tasty and easy to take. And so when we have conversations, then I'm figuring out what's going on. I'm explaining to the parents, and then I'm mailing the herbs out.
Okay,
Yeah.
amazing. And tell us your website one more time.
It's David Allen, LAC, licensed acupuncturist.com. So David Allen,
David Allen, LAC.
LAC.com.
Okay, and we'll link it in the show notes. Thank you so much, David. This has been so amazing. I would love to have you on a million times to talk about all kinds of things like eczema and asthma and just, all of those chronic things that just kind of get us get
Yeah.
us pediatricians excited.
Excited, yeah.
So
No,
I
it was great.
appreciate
Thank you so much. It was a
You're
pleasure
welcome.
to be here.
Well, for all of y'all who don't know me, I'm Dr. Ellie. I'm here with my pod, I Heal Kids. Check out my website, middlepathintegratedpediatrics.com, and I am wishing you guys well. Bye.